Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to welcome Professor Robert A.F. Thurman in the holy precinct of Vedanta Society, Berkeley, and you all, and especially Professor Goldman and Shelley Goldman, to this maiden program of the collaborative lecture series on religions in the modern world with Vedanta Society Berkeley and the Institute of South Asian Studies, UC Berkeley. Vedanta Society Berkeley arranges such program with an objective in view that eminent scholars and experts from diverse fields explores ways in which their disciplines can help individuals realize their boundless human potentialities. Robert A.F. Thurman, who is J. Song Khapa Professor of Indo-Tibetan Buddhist Studies, Department of Religion, Columbia University, President of Tibet House, QS. He is also the President of American Institute of Buddhist Studies. He is the author of innumerable books in his credit. The New York Times recently said Professor Thurman is considered the leading American expert on Tibetan Buddhism. Professor Thurman is not only a distinguished scholar on Buddhism or an outstanding orator, he is spiritual soul also, dearly loved by His Holiness Dalai Lama. I wish to record my thanks to Institute of South and Southeast Asian Studies, UC Berkeley, for inviting Professor Thurman, who has also kindly given his consent to be the first speaker in this lecture series. This evening, Professor Thurman is going to speak on Shunyata Karuna Garbham, non-duality in Buddhist and Vedantist philosophy. Let us join hands to welcome Professor Thurman at the holy precinct of Vedanta Society, Berkeley. Yes.
I do have a PowerPoint on that. Maybe I should use that. I didn't. I thought you said it was non-dualism. If I do that, I can use that PowerPoint. Might be helpful. Well, doesn't matter. Anyway, so how is everyone? I'm very grateful. Thank you, Swamiji, and I'm very honored to be here. And I want to thank the Goldmans, the two Professor Goldmans, for inviting me to Berkeley and in collaboration with you. And I'm talking about Shunyata Karuna Garbham is famous. I think someone take my jacket off if you don't mind. Is an expression of the great Nagarjuna, Arya Nagarjuna, who was a wonderful master who is very hard to date because he supposedly lived from about 100 before the Common Era to 500 of the Common Era. A mere 600 years. Not quite as much as Methuselah, but quite a while. And of course, Western scholars don't accept that could be possibly so. So they think there are 3 Nagarjunas, possibly, and that somehow the Indians couldn't tell the difference. Which I don't think so. I personally don't think so. He was an alchemist in his younger days and a doctor, and he apparently never ate ordinary food, and so he lived a really long time. That's what they think. And he begins his, the phrase Shunyata Karuna Garbham comes from his work called Ratnavali, where, and this can be dated approximately around 2nd century of the Common Era, when he was the preceptor of a king of the Shatavahana dynasty in the Deccan, whose name was Tibetan, I think Udayi Bhadra or something like that, Teji Sampo. And he wrote a book called Ratnavali, or Jewel Rosary, or Jewel Garland, giving him royal advice. And at one point in that, he wrote about the different levels of Buddha's teaching. And he said that the Buddhas teach according to the capacity of the student. And to some they teach to refrain from sin. And to some they teach to do good. And for some they teach dualism of real and unreal, good and bad, and this sort of thing, samsara and nirvana. And then for the highest teaching, they teach non-duality, advayam, and which is biru bijanam, which is frightening to the timid, which is bodhi sadhanam, which is enlightenment in practice, which is, and then the great phrase, which is my favorite, Shunyata Karuna Garbham, which is voidness or emptiness, the womb of compassion. Or you can take Garbha as meaning essence also, but I prefer womb. Because voidness, people think of voidness as meaning kind of empty space, blank empty space, like nothingness, like whatever they imagine nothingness to be. Since our minds are mostly gripped with trying to think of what nothingness might be, and we don't really pay attention to the obvious fact that nothing is nothing. So it's not like anything, because it isn't there. There is no such thing as nothingness, in fact. That's what the word means, that it is not there. And therefore no one can find it, no one can experience it, and most important for American materialists to recognize, no one can become it, or enter it, or go to sleep in it forever, That's ridiculous. Anyway, so that shunyata is often assumed to be something like that, actually like an empty space. So, however, to think of shunyata as a womb, of course you can analyze that compound as another way, as Drs. Goldman will, I'm sure, tell us. But shunyata karuna garbham, you can take it in other ways. But the way I take it is emptiness, the womb of compassion. And the Tibetan translation analyzes the compound in that way also. It's a very beautiful expression in Tibetan. And like ning, 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 there's 3 words like that. And to think of emptiness being the nature of ultimate reality as a nurturing membrane. And what is it nurturing? Like a womb, a womb. What is it nurturing? It is nurturing karuna. And karuna means compassion. So emptiness, the womb of compassion. That's the ultimate non-duality, according to Nagarjuna. So the Dalai Lama really likes that phrase. And in the Kalachakra Tantra is a very common phrase. And so generally it's a good phrase. It's a great word. It's my favorite phrase, actually. My daughter, one of my daughters, my second daughter, her middle name is Karuna. I like the word so much. Karuna. Uma Karuna. That's her name. So now I'm going to read something else from Nagarjuna, I thought, just to start us off with a bang. So, but remember this Biru Bijanam. It's a little intimidating, the non-duality, according to Nagarjuna. And therefore, it's not for everyone. In other words, first it builds up in a sort of higher and higher ability to understand it. But the reason that it's not for everyone, because shunyata is not for everyone, Because shunyata, Nagarjuna has a famous phrase where he says, a misconceived shunyata is it very dangerous, like a mantric spell that is misused, or a snake that is held in the wrong way, and it will destroy you. But what he means by, and therefore you should not teach about shunyata to people who are not prepared for it. But what that means, I think, the way I teach about it to everybody, myself personally, I break Nagarjuna's stricture. And in this modern time, and the reason I do is I have my excuse, which you can refute me, we can debate it, but my excuse for that is that in Nagarjuna's day in India, most people had some sort of faith in something. You had Hindus and Buddhists and Jains and etc. And they all did believe in something. They were sort of, they were not nihilistic. Only the Charvaka or Lokayata, philosopher was a nihilist, meaning believed that ultimately nothing is the nature of things, and when you die, you have no migration. You have no soul, so you don't migrate. So you simply cease to exist. And that's the danger of a misunderstanding of shunyata, of emptiness, is that misunderstanding it to mean nothingness, and therefore losing all spiritual motivation, all ethical motivation, and therefore being endangered of committing unethical behaviors, and not developing, using your human opportunity, of your human intelligence to develop positive qualities in yourself, thinking that it doesn't matter because ultimately it will all be nothing. So that was considered to be like a very dangerous thing. But in modern time, everybody thinks that they're nothing. That's the consensus reality. Even people who think they believe in something, they live as if all they are is here in this life, and all they're going to get out of it is here in this life. Because the consensus reality, the supposed scientists who supposedly know what reality is and tell you what it is in classrooms, in school, not in church, but in school, they assure you that it's been long found out that after death, there's no further existence. You become nothing. And that all that stuff about reincarnation or rebirth or soul going to heaven or hell or something like that, that's all some old-fashioned religious superstition, which people are terrorized by religious establishments. That is the consensus reality we should face. I'm not saying here you are in the Vedanta society. You may well have some view of the future life, probably. How many people here are sure they're going to have a future life? So not everybody. Some of you are not sure. How many people here are sure they're not going to have a future life? Only one person? I think a few more than that. But you're absolutely sure. Okay, that's interesting. And I'm sure I am forced to have a future life. I'm not that thrilled about it, because I don't know exactly what neighborhood I'll be reborn in, or in what sort of body, or even whether I'll be a human being, according to the Buddhist biological theory of karma. Karma is a theory of biology. It's a biological theory, by the way. It's not some mystical theory. It's just simply a biological theory. Long before Darwin, Buddha talked about the kinship of different animal species. And in fact, he made it a little more personal than Darwin, because in Darwin's case, of course, since there's no soul and no rebirth of the individual person, it's just the genes that go on, the species that goes on. And therefore, okay, we have 99% or 95% chimpanzee genes, the human beings do. And then we have that 5% that enable us to go to Berkeley and study physics and whatever. But it's not a personal matter, because you won't be there. When your genes have developed something further type of human species, then you won't be involved. You're not involved, because in a way you're not even there, because you don't exist apart from your body created by your genes. Whereas in Buddha's case, but your genes relate you to all life forms, according to Darwin, right? That's what the creationist people are frightened about. The ones in Texas, who they don't want to be related to chimpanzees. They're scared of that because those chimpanzees might not be able to get a license to own a gun, carry a concealed weapon. So they don't want that. And but in the case of the Buddha, not only do we have chimpanzee genes, but we were personally all chimpanzees many times, and we will be chimpanzees again if we behave like a chimpanzee in this life. And every other kind of animal too, even less attractive ones than chimpanzees. We've all been, according to Buddhist biology, personally. So it's like a Lamarckian thing where the individual has some inheritance of what they do, of how their life is shaped by genes and so on. By the way, I'm sorry about my voice. I've been giving too many lectures lately, sometimes 2 or 3 a day, and I get hoarse like this. I apologize. I gave a couple already today, but informal ones. And okay, so the one person in the room brave enough to be sure they will not have a future life, I only have one thing to say about that. What is the evidence that you can be nothing? That's my question. What evidence do you have that anything can become nothing? And I just leave you to think about that. I'm not going to say, I might say more later, but I want to float that thought. Who has evidence that something can become nothing? The law of conservation of energy of thermodynamics teaches that energy is never destroyed. It only changes form. So when with matter goes, everyone acknowledges that there's no instance of anything becoming any material or energetic thing becoming nothing. But why then is your consciousness able to become nothing? Is my question. Or is it nothing right now? Then that would be okay if that was the case. But otherwise, what evidence is there? My contention being, of course, that the belief that there will be no continuation of consciousness upon the cessation of the brain and the heart and the blood running to the brain, that belief has to be a blind faith dogmatic belief, because there will be no evidence for it. They can say that believing in a God, for example, is a blind faith belief. Scientists will say that. And actually some religious people will say that. But actually, now and then people have an experience of some voice speaking to them. I think Moses saw a bush that talked, a talking bush. Not like our talking bushes. This one was an actual bush, and it was burning. And it told him to do a lot of irrational things, like go and talk to Pharaoh when Pharaoh would disagree. And he would make Pharaoh disagree even. So anyway. But anyway, the point is, the interpretation that is an absolute God is a stretch. I agree with you. But the point is, at least there was some sort of experience. So therefore, empirical scientists, they go by experience. Experiment means something you experience, you measure. Who has experienced nothing? And when will they ever do so? Did Carl Sagan ever show up on Larry King Live and say, it's cool, I don't exist anymore? I can verify that I became nothing when I died. I don't think so. And not only do I not think so, but that would never happen, of course. Okay, so I'm just kidding. As I think you're kidding too, I think. Since you can't really be sure of that, no one can. So, back to Nagarjuna. In the beginning of his famous book called Wisdom, Prajna, Mula Madhyamaka Karika, the verses that are the root of the central way. He begins with this: I praise that perfect Buddha, the supreme philosopher, who taught us relativity, free of destruction and creation, without cessation and permanence, with no coming and no going, meaning neither unity nor plurality, the quieting of fabrications, bliss supreme. And actually, I confess, I am translating the word Shiva as bliss. Shivam, the last word of his verse is Shivam. Paramam Shivam, highest bliss. But since he didn't believe, Nagarjuna did not disbelieve in Shiva. That's a wrong thing. Buddhists are not atheists. I think you may know that. No Buddhist was ever an atheist. But they just don't believe that Brahma or Shiva or Vishnu has created everything. They don't blame any one of the gods as being omnipotent, and they don't consider the concept of an omnipotent creator to be a rational concept. So therefore they don't believe that. But they believe there are beings who are much stronger than human beings and who are divine. It would be defined by us as divine and deva, in Sanskrit. And Buddhists believe that. They talk to them. There are many sutras where Buddha is talking to the gods in great detail, in Pali also, not just Mahayana, in Pali. In fact, there's one wonderful one that I like, where Buddha goes in one summer vacation during the rainy season to teach his mother, who is living in the Trayastrimsha heaven, the 33 heaven, which is the heaven of Indra. And she went there after she passed away, which she did when he was a baby. And he promised that when he became enlightened, he would go teach her. But the poor mom, he teaches her the most boring thing in all of Buddhism, namely the Abhidharma. Now, when he's going to do that, there's one sutra where Indra is chasing around the gods of the 33. And because they are saying, well, he's teaching his mom, let him teach his mom. We are having a party. We don't want to come to the class. So Indra says, you better come to that class. If you do, because Brahma is coming down from a higher heaven, Akanishta, and Brahma is going to see to it that you 33 deity gods come to class and listen to what Buddha has to say. And if you don't come, he's going to punish you. So he comes down in the form of Panchashika. They say 5-crested hairdo. Brahma comes down to that heaven which is in the desire realm. Akanishta is in the realm of pure form, according to the cosmology. So I just want to make that point in case people think Buddhists are Nastikas, meaning they don't believe in the gods. They do. They just don't believe there's any one big boss god, that's all. Or goddess. So the word Shiva here, he means something really good. The word Shiva, even for Buddhists, means a good thing, but he doesn't mean the person in this case. But there are other works of Nagarjuna where he might mention Shiva as a divine person. On the other hand, the Buddhists think that the gods tend to pride. They tend to be a little bit proud. They become a little bit inflated with their divine power and beauty and longevity. And they therefore are less fortunate than humans as far as becoming enlightened, because they've sort of overshot the ideal life form for becoming enlightened, which is a human, where the human has an intelligence similar to that of the divinities, but the human is very vulnerable and has a short life and is afraid of suffering and very aware of it, immediacy of suffering to the human. So they have a real motive to try to understand the real nature of something and to really realize tattvam asi, to put it in Vedantic terms, that, Satchit Ananda, or let's say Satchit Ananda, which I think they all agree. Everybody agrees that's what Nirvana is Satchit Ananda. I don't know about Chit, maybe, depending on what you think of as Chit. The Yogacara Buddhists would agree with Satchit Ananda, but the Madhyamikas might complicate things. So then he begins his first verse. No things are ever found by any means to be produced from themselves, from other things, from both, or without causes. So right away it's neti with Nagarjuna. And then Chandrakirti, his great commentator from the 6th, 7th century, says that Nagarjuna begins with this sort of very challenging statement of anutpada, of non-production. To mean, the reason he does is that when you are meditating and attaining the realization of the prajna paramita, which means transcendent wisdom, if prajna really means wisdom, wisdom may mean in English to many of us, it may connote a kind of resignation of an elder person who feels that life is tough and they sort of resign themselves to coping with it, and sort of an acceptance of the way things are being not so great. And that's sort of wisdom. That might be the connotation we have of wisdom, as a kind of resignation to something. an acceptance of some unpleasant thing even, let's say. But the prajna doesn't mean that. Jna is, of course, I think the Bengalis would say jna, not gnya. It means to know, right? Like the same in the Greek, gnosis, jna, same. And pra means super. So it means to super know. And that means to know really deeply with a kind of genius level intelligence. So its symbol in Buddhism is not an old person who's sort of wise and beaten down by the years and accepting of the difficulties. Symbol is a 16-year-old young person called Manjushri, who has a sword of discriminating, analytic, critical wisdom, and a book of the Prajnaparamita on the other hand, and sort of breaking through old, conventional wisdom, conventional knowledge, and something like that, and coming up with a deep insight and understanding of what is reality, what is the nature of reality. I think that's what prajna means, as far as Buddhists go, right? So anyway, when you reach Prajnaparamita, the transcendent wisdom, what happens is you study. Are you okay, Swamiji? Is it okay? You study 10 samatas, they call it, 10 samenesses or 10 equalities. How you understanding all things are equal. And those equalities, the first of those 10 equalities, are the equality of all things in that all things are unproduced, which is kind of a shocking thing to say, because here we feel we're kind of produced. We do, don't we? We all feel that we're produced. However, according to him, and according to Buddhist science in general, if we analyze ourselves with a real reality-seeking, ultimate reality-seeking prajna, wisdom, we will eventually not find anything. Earlier in our conversation, Swamiji mentioned the Upanishadic process known as neti, na-iti, where to find the Supreme Self, as they call it in Vedanta, you reject all small kinds of self. So in other words, you look through your personality, you look through all sorts of things, and each one of them dissolves under analysis, and you say, well, that isn't the real thing. And then you come up with what you don't come up in a way with anything, but when you reach a kind of place beyond all of these things that you normally identify with as yourself or your identity, then that is called the Supreme Self. But you reach there by a process of negation. So that's really quite similar to what prajna does, where it says things are unproduced. And why did they pick a start, unproduction? Because when we want to understand something, we take it apart, and especially we are concerned with how it's caused. What is its process of causation, right? You want to understand a sickness. Well, how did someone get sick? Did they eat such a thing? Did they have a germ? Did they have a virus? Did they have a cancer? Did they have a whatever it is? Is their immune system compromised? So the way of understanding something that human beings do when they're using their intelligence about these things is by analyzing the causation process of how it came to be caused. And then when you do that in a really deep analytical manner, you will not find ultimately any cause. It will disappear. The causation process will become, expand infinitely, and it will disappear under analysis. And so you will realize that in an ultimately real sense, in a relatively real sense, here we are, but in an ultimately real sense, when you look for it, you cannot find it as having been caused. And so that's called the realization of non-production, or birthlessness, actually, they will sometimes say. Anutpada, usually, they say anutpada. So, and that's a very deep thing to do. And when you do that, you correct our misperception of things, of relative things, as if they were absolutely real. Do you know what I mean by saying that? And I think, when in that Upanishad where they go, na-iti, or as people say, neti. But na is na-iti. Iti is just quote. Na means no. So it's negation, right? And then they say neti. And when they do that, they are basically rejecting things that they thought were really real. I think, isn't that a dialogue between Indra and someone? And he's asking Indra, isn't it the one, Yajnavalkya or somebody is asking Indra, what is yourself? And Indra says, well, I am this and I am that. And he's talking with him. And then he keeps saying, Neti, Naiti, Naiti. Everything that you think you are, you're not. Right? And then finally, well, the Supreme Self is something that comes out as a conclusion of that negational process. So anyway, Indra was unproduced. So that's the same thing, if you actually, it sounds shocking to say unproduced. You know, like the Heart Sutra, which is a famous Prajnaparamita text, they go in there and they say no eye, no ear, no nose. So maybe this is way, I know some people are looking puzzled. This is maybe an easy way for you to see this. I challenge everyone here, especially the gentleman who's sure he won't exist. I'm sorry to pick on you, but it always gets me going. And especially, most interestingly, because you have one finger on your nose. So I challenge you to really find your nose, anybody here, to find your real nose. Because the Prajnaparamita Sutra, there's no nose. It says that. So, okay, so we will immediately go, this is my nose, so I found it. But actually, what are you touching? With what are you touching it? The tip of your finger. Well, how much of your tip depends on how hard you press. Right? Then there's a piece of skin. Then you could have an accident, heaven forbid, that piece of skin would be cut off. And you still have a nose. So actually what you touch is not your nose. But arbitrarily we say for the time being, it's my nose. And we keep doing, you can keep going all over everywhere and say this is my nose. But actually everything you touch is not your nose. Because you could lose it and you still have your nose. Then the question becomes, how much would you lose and still have a nose? Of course. But then, well, is there a line between your cheek here and your nose? Who drew that line? And what says this is cheek and this is nose? Is in the nostril you have air going in and out of the passage because you breathe. Is the space in the nostril, is that the nose or is it just empty space? And then inside the nose, you know, the inner skin, etc. And then finally you can go down to where or if you go to a plastic surgeon, he'll have a kind of computer simulation of a nose, if you're thinking of changing your nose, like poor Michael Jackson did. And he'll show all these points, but actually we know that all the points on your nose are not there because any point, to be precise, has no size and therefore it's not there. Right? A point has no size, so there's no point on your nose, actually. All the points on your nose are not points on your nose. They're not on your nose. And then, there's no difference between your nose and your not nose. You can't find it. So we go around with the nose, and when we don't look for it, it's there. I call it the hood ornament for life. You know, like a car's hood ornament. They used to have hood ornaments on cars. You know? So our hood ornaments is the nose, unless we have a very small nose and we can't see it. And Americans have usually big noses, so we can see that hood ornament. So you cannot find your nose, really speaking. And then you have the benefit of particle physics, high energy particle physics, and then they have their wave particle paradox. And then they have their Copenhagen interpretation, and then they do have the Higgs boson, named after a wonderful gentleman. I think boson comes from Bose, not Subhash Chandra Bose, but the other one, the physicist. And they have that famous Higgs boson. And, but that's not, nobody really grabbed a hold of that. That's a bunch of inferences from a bunch of exploding particles, and then they okay, we have a mass there. But so that's the secret of mass. But actually, everything, subatomic particles, charms, spin, it all dissolves under analysis. So you can add that because your nose has atoms, subatomic particles, and then they all dissolve under analysis. So if you took your nose and threw it into an electrocyclotron or whatever those things that are cloud chamber, you couldn't find the nose in there or any of the atoms in the nose. So that's non-production, no nose. But you don't find the nothing of the nose, on the other hand, either. You just can't find the nose, but you never find the absence of the nose, actually. You don't. But And then you say, well, this is silly because I don't have to look for my nose because there's my nose. And that's true. And that nose is a relative nose. And it's arbitrarily defined as different from the cheek and so forth. And then if you don't apply too strong a criteria of reality to it, you can live there like an illusion, like a Maya. But if you try to pin it down and really find that nose, you can't find it. So that's sort of what is meant by non-production. And if you take a thought experiment like that, which I know sounds silly, and it's like arbitrary, you're saying it's just a thought experiment, but if you take that and you combine samadhi power, one-pointed concentration with that, and you really have an experience of the disappearing of your nose, then you are beginning to develop prajnaparamita, transcendent wisdom. And I think then your Vedantin yogi or yogini is beginning to develop some sort of sense of neti, and they're reaching toward the area of where they have an experience of everything kind of disappearing, which they may call, Tattvam Asi, they may call Paramatma, they may call, all sorts of things, Aham Brahmasmi, they feel they are one with Brahma. And the world was just a dream, like a dream. The Buddhists would never say it's just a dream. They would say like a dream, like an illusion. They never say it's Maya. They say it's Mayopama, like a dream. And that may be an important difference. That's the topic today is the difference. That may be an important difference, actually. Calling it a dream, a complete illusion, or like an illusion is a very big difference, possibly. So both share this kind of analytic idea, and to understand what they're doing about that, I think we have to talk about what the Buddhists call, and here I don't know if Vedanta uses this kind of terminology, they call it the self-identity habit, the atmagraha, they call it, or the self-habit, or sometimes, they have other expressions, but Atmasvabhava Graha, they have words like that, although I don't know, so I don't know if they use that language in Vedanta. Actually, I don't know that. In sort of practice manuals, I don't know if they use that, but they do in Buddhism. And what that means is that when you see the floor, or when we see the pillar, let's take the pillar. You don't think that pillar has, your mind's perception of that pillar is somehow, in a way, constructing that pillar. We don't think that. We think that pillar has a kind of intrinsic objectivity. There's a great word that modern sociologists of knowledge use. That pillar has a massive facticity. I love that term. It's like massive in its factuality. And it sort of looms there as something outside of us, like a thing in itself. Right? Or the floor, it's really solid. We're confident it will be there when we step on it. And even modern science will tell us we are actually trading in an illusion. Because the brain is actually, when we see things like that, the brain is actually constructing this out of some reflected light waves and things, and neural energy transformations. And then we construct what looks like a solid world out there, and we kind of have to reconstruct that. As you will know if you've ever been really drunk, or something really stoned, or somehow discombobulated by a blow or concussion, you can't construct what's out there, you'll hallucinate something instead. And they will tell us that. And they'll also tell us that actually the pillar is made up of atoms, and the atoms mostly are empty space, and there's a nucleus and some electrons that somehow create, in our experience, the illusion of solidity. And it's such an illusion that if I run into the pillar, I'll knock myself out. So it's pretty strongly concrete. It's pretty concrete. So, like we don't just see a relative nose in us. We don't experience our nose as a relative thing. We experience it as an absolute nose. It's a real nose in itself, if you follow me. And we don't see the atomic nature of the nose, which supposedly, by having analyzed it by science, is more real, a bunch of atoms spinning around, than this solid piece of flesh that we think is automatically there. So in other words, what these neti processes are doing, or the critical analysis called vipassana in Sanskrit of prajna, of wisdom, is they are actually taking the bit in their own experiential teeth, and they are looking for the reality of objects and subjects and subjectivities and the mind as well, looking for it with full force and with a very high concentration, with a mental stability that is like some kind of atom-splitting machine. Actually, just as powerful, because the mind is capable of that according to Indian scientists, actually. Adhyatma Vidya, Indian inner scientists. The mind is a very powerful instrument. You don't just have to have some sort of a gun-like machine shooting molecules around. The mind is, because actually the mind is made, the body is made of molecules that are shooting around. And they can become self-aware, is the claim in all of the Indian traditions, not just Buddhism. And so this is the similarity, that both are transcending our illusory participation in a world as if the world was all a bunch of things in itself. And of course, the worst part of that both Buddhism and Vedanta is concerned with, the biggest thing in itself for everybody here is themselves. Every person thinks, I'm a thing in itself. What do you mean? The one thing I know is real is me. Right? Don't you think? Like each one of you is here sitting, you're inside your skin, you're looking out through your senses, and the one thing you're sure of that's really real is your awareness in this, organizing all these sensory perceptions and inner thoughts, right? And therefore each of you pay attention to yourself, and you're concerned about yourself. Am I in a decent chair? Am I doing the right thing? Am I okay? Et cetera, et cetera. Each one is in their own little world. And therefore there's a tendency among us, none of you I'm sure, but I can own up to it, of getting to feel that maybe I'm the most important thing here. Maybe. A few of us feel like that. And the minute I feel like that, I get nervous, because what do we all know? Nobody else agrees that we are the most important. Right? Does anybody else agree? I don't think so. Each of us thinks that. Each person here is the center of the event here. And therefore, to yourself, and you think that's normal and that's healthy, even. And you would be crazy or irresponsible if you didn't know who you were or where you were. But you also, and so you're sort of really paying most attention to yourself. And yet nobody else is paying attention to you. So you feel a little something, like, what's wrong? How come I'm not being considered the most important here? And then how come they think they're the most important? Each of them thinks. So this is the problem, of that intrinsic reality habit, or intrinsic identity habit, or intrinsic self habit, being attached to the self itself, thinking I'm the greatest thing. And of course, then Vedanta goes up to where actually the Supreme Self is the self that is beyond that little petty individual self. So they are also critiquing that feeling, the same way as the Buddhists. But then they call the state of freedom from that critique the Supreme Self, and the Buddhists call it the selflessness. That's the difference. Although then the Buddhists have language, they say, Nairatmya Paramatma, the Supreme Self of selflessness. They say that. And then they get into this kind of thing, achintya, like Bob Goldman was mentioning earlier. Inconceivable, unthinkable. That's what reality is. And that's not rocket science either, right? Like you have a delicious apple, and then you read 10, 20 poems about an apple. And you read like 100 chemical formulas about the constitution of the apple, and geology and agriculture and whatever it is. And you look every word, verbal description of that apple. And you see 10 still life paintings of that apple. And then you eat the apple. And then your experience of eating that delicious apple, none of those descriptions are adequate. It's somehow beyond the expression of all of those different things. Even though you say, I'm eating the apple, but what's happening is a lot more complicated than I'm eating the apple, or any other formula or anything, right? It's an inconceivable experience, actually, an inexpressible experience. And I like that about Buddha. He said, I'm a Buddha, means I know everything now. However, unfortunately, I can't explain it to you, because it's inexpressible. But I can give you some critical, pathways of analysis and thought and meditation and practice, where you can also experience everything, which was very radical. That's an Indian thing. Indian people are radical. They look very peaceful and quiet, but they are radical. And that culture was radical compared to the Western culture, because they taught that the human being has the capacity of understanding the nature of reality. Paramartha Satya. Human being can do that. You don't hear that in the West. Scientists, oh yeah, we're realistic. We analyze this gene, we analyze this cell, this molecule, this astro, the collision of black holes and blah, blah, blah. We're still looking for dark matter. It's really dark, so we can't see it. And we haven't seen it yet, but we're sure it's there and we're looking for it. And they're doing that, but then they tell you, well, every time you find something and you know this thing, there's so many more things you don't know. So the idea that to know everything, if you came out of your lab at Berkeley, if you're in the science department and you say, well, I know everything, they would say, oh, that's nice. We have an institution down the street where you can go and have some Prozac and take a break because you're nuts. And then religious people, they tell you can't know, God knows, and you don't know. So the Indian people, on the other hand, you can be God. You can know. Even Indra, the gods, when somebody becomes a big ascetic and they do tapas, and they get all heat and they get deep insights, then the gods get mad because they think they're coming to take away their throne in heaven, so they challenge them. Because even the gods admit that the humans can come to know something in India. And, Tattvamasi, the high statement in Vedanta, from Brahma Sutra, you are that, meaning you are God. Aham Brahmohasimi, I am Brahma, thought of as a supreme being, That in the West, that's the pantheistic heresy. The idea that God is in you. And you get executed for that in the Western history. You get burned at the stake. You can be a mystic and get away with it if you don't say it too loud. But mostly you get executed for that. That's a heresy, in other words. Whereas in India, everybody tries to be God, Anybody who gets educated, and in Brahmins, they try. And they succeed, actually. So many of them have kind of succeeded. And many have become Buddhas and enlightened. Many. And now we're sort of fooling around with that in the West. But unfortunately, most of the people here think enlightenment means the great experience of not knowing anything. Somebody was saying in the conference, I was down there, the Nonduality conference in San Jose, some lady came up and said, oh, I'm so happy. Well, why? Well, I've been hearing how that the highest achievement is the experience of not knowing. So what I want to know, I asked her, I said, well, you mean when Buddha attained enlightenment, what he said was, duh. Is that what you say? Although there is a language of, again, they say, nirvana by the path of not knowing. But what they mean by that is that you give up trying to know it dualistically, where you want to make it fit with your concept that you had ahead of time. Why do we bored in life? Why do we have very little fun in life? Because any experience that we experience, we fit it right away into a concept that we already preconceived. So we feel comfortable that we recognized it and it's sort of under control and it fits with our network of expected experiences. And if something doesn't fit in our concept, we feel uneasy and we feel a little bit lost. And therefore, nothing ever surprises us, and we have a very hard time letting go and seeing a new dimension in whatever it is. Although we admire poetry because poets see the same things we do and then they find other dimensions in them. Like Shelley, the famous poet Shelley said, poets are unacknowledged legislators of mankind, by which he meant that they see new perspectives in things that add to our stock of concepts to enable us to have deeper experiences and more beautiful experiences of things, or more horrific experience, depending on where they're trying to open up our awareness. So now coming back to the differences of Buddhism, of non-dualism, Buddhism and Vedanta. So therefore, non-dualism is very challenging also, because non-dualism ultimately means that the ultimate reality and relative reality are a duality that is transcended by non-dualism. So that means that relative reality is ultimate in its relativity. And ultimately, again, this is inexpressible, but they're very good at giving vectors of enabling us to have a kind of sense of what it is beyond which we cannot conceive and cannot understand, and therefore it's achintya, or inconceivable. And the great philosophers in Sanskrit, both Hindu and Buddhist and Jain, and any other group that might have arisen, they are the greatest philosophers of the world. I'm very sorry, Mr. Greek, Mr. Socrates, Mr. Persia, Mr. China. The Indians were the best. Sanskrit is a special language for philosophy, for science. It's Sanskrit means perfected, made perfectly accurate. Of course, nothing is absolutely perfect, but the closest to that is Deva Bhasha, the language of the gods. Am I right, Dr. Goldman? Yes, sir. Yes. And actually in America, I don't people know that in the 1890s, many colleges in the Ivy League taught Sanskrit in classics departments. And it's a disgrace that they have ceased to do that. And we have to fight and make South Asian department or do something to get a Sanskrit chair or lectureship or anything on any campus. Supposedly a great church university, because they're all out there trying to make money by getting patents, by making some drugs or some bombs or something. And that's what they think is important in our universities. And they don't think that knowledge, in fact, the only way you can be a well-known philosopher in America nowadays is find out a new way of pronouncing philosophy as dead. You have to say philosophy died, and it no longer helps. So we just do literary criticism, or art criticism, or ethical or political criticism, like someone like Richard Rorty, The Mirror of Nature. Philosophy is finished. Because a human being can't understand anything. You just have the machines, and your natural sciences are going to measure everything. That's how pathetic we've become, actually. I'm sorry, we think we're super modern and super civilized, and look at us. Look at what we elected. Look at what we're doing to the planet. It's really sad, Really. We're a bunch of nihilists. So, anyway, but here's where there might be a tiny difference. That supreme, there's really no difference. It's not the difference of anatma and paramatma. Supreme self and no self. That's not really a difference, because the no self is all these kind of minor selves, and then selflessness is where the self expands to embrace everything, and that they call supreme self, and that's okay. And Buddhists sometimes do that too. They see, like as I said, they make expressions like supreme self or selflessness. So that's not the big difference. But there might be this one difference. There's two kinds of oneness. Here, Swamiji, maybe I mentioned this the other day, but I want to mention it again. And I'm very intent about this one. Shunyata karuna garbham. So shunyata, emptiness, the womb of wisdom. One of the deepest ways of expressing non-duality. I'm sorry, in emptiness, the womb of compassion. Terrible. So in a way, that's a wisdom and compassion indivisible. It's a similar type of expression. And why compassion? People say, well, if you realize emptiness, then you realize sort of everything, you go beyond everything. And there is an experience of anybody who does this anybody who reads this chapter in the wisdom, or the 27 critiques of different notions of solid reality that Nagarjuna has there, which are kind of like an atom-smashing text, these 27 critiques. If you read these critiques, pretty much everything disappears. And you do have an experience as if the world disappears and you, looking at it, disappear with it. And you don't disappear just like falling asleep and disappearing. You disappear in a kind of luminous space where there's a feeling of infinite energy. There's definitely this experience that great yogis and mystics and philosophers and scientists, and all Indian scientists are yogis. Yogi, yogini, they're all yogis. Yogi just means you yoke your own personal experience, your mind, your heart, your perceptual mechanisms. You yoke that to your quest for ultimate union, ultimate reality. It's not just something you play around outside and it doesn't affect you personally, because you're just doing some conceptual manipulations over here or with some machinery. Yogi means you yoke your life to what you do. And I think actually many scientists, material scientists, who are deeply non-dogmatically sitting there hanging on to their dogma of materialism, but who are deeply looking into nature with great effort and with painstaking care and working very, very hard, they are yogis. They put their whole life into it. There was a famous physicist yogi, which may just be a joke, but there's a story told around Columbia having to do with the Manhattan Project, where they made the atom bomb, started making the atom bomb before they moved it out into the desert. It started in Manhattan, in Columbia. And there was one physics professor, when he came to his lab, he had a pair of snowshoes hanging on the wall in his lab. And he would put them on, and he would clump around the lab with his snowshoes. And then the graduate student finally worked up their courage, and he said, "Professor, why do you come to the lab and go clumping around in your snowshoes?" And he said, "Well, because when I come here, my mind gets into thinking of things in terms of their atomic and subatomic nature. And I'm increasing my chances of not falling down through the floor into the subway." I like that one. I'm sorry. I like my own jokes. What can I say? So there is this experience, and it's a very powerful one. And what's great about it is that because you remain conscious going into this experience, you go past kind of a tendency to wish to go unconscious, like a deep sleep state. And this is like turiya. They call it turiya. It's a fourth state. It's neither the waking or normal waking state of the subject-object difference, where you're an isolated subjectivity within a world of objects. It's not the dream state, and it's not the deep sleep unconscious state. It's a fourth state. So there is a state like that. And then there is a danger of thinking that that state is the absolute state. And there, one is absolute there. And so then people come back from that state in various places and societies, because it's not just in India that this is achieved. Other people have achieved it through other traditions. And they say, "Wow, I was in the absolute. All reality was one. I wasn't just selfishly there, because in a way I wasn't there, but yet I was there. My awareness was that whole state. And therefore, but now I'm back. I'm not sure why, but by momentum, I guess. But I'll go back there when I pass away, and that'll be my nirvana." And that must have been what happened to Buddha when he attained parinirvana. That's what it must mean. So, in other words, the ultimate state is some place apart from the relative state. But how can that be non-duality? That can't be non-duality unless somehow that ultimate destroys the relative. And that's not nice. But there's a real temptation, because that state is just as real to the yogi as when I clap my hand on the pillar and it feels really hard on my hand, and that's therefore reality, Like G.E. Moore, one philosopher who used to debate with Wittgenstein in England, he used to pound his hand on the table and he'd say, "This is real," and he'd whack his hand on the table. He didn't like this sort of critical thing about how it was a construct in a way. It was not necessarily ultimately real. So then that vast absence of everything is a kind of blissful, and it's a kind of release, because there's nothing else that can bother you, so you're not frightened of the rest of the world, because you feel the whole world is this, in that. So it's a great oneness, but nobody's home in the oneness, including yourself. And you then can call that. There's a danger of calling that Brahma, God, Supreme Self, whatever. You can call it all kinds of things and act like you're enlightened when you're back in town afterwards, or in the ashram, or in the monastery, or in the Buddhist monastery, whatever. Buddhists, this happens to them too. And the Christians too, other mystics, Kabbalists, Sufis. But non-duality, karuna part, shunyata karuna. Karuna part means there has to be a moving together of that experience, because if that experience is apart from this experience of all relative Maya, illusory type of things, then it's a relative state, not the absolute state. Because there's a boundary between it and this state. Even though when you're in it, it seems like it has swallowed this state. But still, that happened at a temporal moment. And then you come back out of it, and that's a temporal moment. That makes it a relative state. It has a boundary. time and space. The real one is where it's that ocean of bliss, and that's where the inconceivability comes in, that ocean of bliss, that Satchit Ananda, and also everybody hanging around town. It's the same thing. Exact same thing. So this is all ocean of bliss, but we're all here. It's all one and everybody's there. Okay? And then why do you need karuna? Well, gee whiz, not so many people see the ocean of bliss side of it. Do they now? Even their societies more or less don't allow them to. It's like considered a little dangerous or something. Maybe they won't know what to do. They won't be able to fight. They won't be able to drive on the right side of the road. They won't be responsible for themselves. They'll be like, well, it's all an ocean of bliss. But that's Shunyata Karuna Garbham. And I believe that in Vedanta, when you are one with Brahma, and after all, Brahma is creator for them. There's, among others, but Brahma, sometimes they call it something else, but there is the idea of that creator, and then the world is Brahma's dream, I think. And the illusion you wake up from was like a dream of Brahma. But the dream is not completely unreal. A dream is similar to unreal, but it has some quality of reality about it. And particularly because in that dream there are many beings who are suffering, who don't know they're in some ocean of bliss, Satchidananda, and in fact they're feeling, oh, where's my Ananda? Where's my Chit? And I don't even know if I'm Sat. And a lot of them are so scared of that they go and have a theory that they're going to basically be nothing. And that just feels like a safe zone to them, actually. And they even fool themselves thinking they're so brave to think there'll be nothing, which is a complete self-deception, because when you're in pain, you welcome being nothing. You shoot up. You demand anesthesia when you're having an open heart surgery or something. You don't want to feel that. And you like to be unconscious for certain things. And even we have a saying in English, ignorance is bliss. Meaning there's many things we don't want to know. The opposite, Vedanta and Buddhism say ignorance is suffering, is the cause of suffering, and wisdom is bliss, knowledge is bliss. Am I right? Swamiji agrees with that. But this is a tricky one because people the compassion part seems hard. If you see, but theoretically speaking, Buddha sees beings. He takes that to be a Buddha by definition. I don't even know if there is such a thing, by the way. I'm not one. And I'm not sure I've met one. I might have. I met some people I thought were pretty spectacular, but I don't know if they were Buddhas, because it takes one to know one. And I'm not one. So I don't even know. It could be just a fantasy. But how it's defined is very technical. And it's defined as a being that finds oneness without departing from being connected to everything in the kind of absolute relativity of the world. And in this absolute relativity of the world, meaning in a way that the absolute is empty as anything, any kind of absolute that would be apart from the world is empty, and emptiness is empty, and therefore the absolute is the world. Right? And therefore, and they're only capable of seeing that because of the Ananda vision. And they see all the beings as made of Ananda. If Buddha was there and he looked at us or looked at me, he would see me who has a headache. I'm going to catch an airplane. My voice is hoarse. I'm like a harried professor. I'm 76 years old. I'm trying to retire. But he would see me as made of bliss. Like every cell in my body is pure Ananda. And Chit and Sat. Buddha would see that like that. They call it bliss void indivisible, they call it. But then he couldn't not see that I don't think so. What is this bliss? I have a sore back, my toe hurts. What's the bliss? So then, because of complete empathy, complete perception of everything from every direction by definition, like when you completely identify with another, a beloved or a child, a newborn, when a human being can completely identify with another human being, for sure. Hopefully we've all had that experience. It doesn't last forever, The honeymoons do not last forever, unfortunately, but they do exist. And also people, identify with their buddies in war, and they freak out when the buddy gets shot or something. Human being can expand their identification. Buddha is defined as one has infinitely expanded that sense of self-identification. That's supreme self, or you're everybody. Okay? So your compassion then knows that the beings don't feel that way. And yet they can't just be sort of brainwashed that they have to. They can't bomb them into bliss. If they released a huge energy of bliss, then beings would feel frightened and would get more contracted and more closed off. And they'd feel they were being assaulted by something. So compassion can only figure out art form, educational forms, teaching forms, sutras, shastras, where the beings will open their mind through gaining deeper knowledge, through discovering what is in front of them, through discovering what they are. So then the poor Buddha has to be a teacher, Shasta. Deva Manushyanam Shasta, one of Buddha's names. Teacher of humans and gods, Deva Manushyanam Shasta. Even in Pali he has that name. Okay? So there could be a tiny difference, only possibly because Vedanta, for example, Shankaracharya, the great Shankaracharya. I don't mean the modern ones in the different mutts nowadays in India, who are all very great beings too. I mean the original one who wrote the Brahma Sutra Bhashya and this kind of thing, and the Gita Bhashya, the Gita commentary. He wrote this, Nirguna Brahman, and the radical non-duality. So therefore, all things like even notion of creator, notion of God, caste system, all structures in society are relativized, in other words, he did, which is actually where Buddhism stands. So later, was it Madhva or Ramanuja who called him Prachanabauda and rejected his radical non-dualism and came up with Vishishtadvaita and came up with even Dvaitadvaita, which is even more far out. Dualistic non-duality, which, although I like that one, Buddhism is very dualistic non-duality because the dualistic side is non-duality, it supports the dualism of compassion, of helping others, of serving them, of helping them find freedom from their suffering, finding their own oneness with everybody, whether Brahmin or Chandala, or male or female, or human or dog, for that matter, which is a little more radical. I think Shankara's Nirguna Brahman also like that. And therefore he was rejected by later Brahmins because it challenges the caste system, at least the absoluteness of the caste system. It challenges some kind of theological doctrines and things. The absoluteness of even the Vedas, that they are absolute, are challenged by Nirguna Brahman. That all Saguna is in some way, Maya. But that's very close to Buddhism. So in a way, Shankara is just same as Nagarjuna, actually, which is funny because Shankara, in one of his, I forget, I guess Brahma Sutra Bhashya, he rejects every kind of Indian philosophical school other than his Vedanta, except for Nagarjuna, the Madhyamaka. He doesn't reject him. He just says he's a bad guy. I'm not going to talk about him. But that's because he's the same as him, actually. He's doing the same critique of all theoretical attempts to control reality through theories, which are all doomed to failure from the point of view of both Vedanta, especially Nirguna Brahman Advaita Vedanta, radical Advaita Vedanta of Shankaracharya, and also Madhyamaka, Prasangika Madhyamaka of Nagarjuna. Okay, so that might be enough of my presentation, but I'm ready to answer questions, especially from the gentleman who's sure he doesn't exist. I really want to have that discussion, but I don't mean to bug you. I apologize if I don't mean to pick on you. I'm sorry. I'm just always after them because it's such a dogma in America, that, life is meaningless, random, no teleology, it's an accident, Carl Sagan sending out Sati, where is there life on other planets, etc. Ancient India, Yoga Vashista, Buddhist sutras, people Bodhisattvas come from other universes by mind teleportation to attend on teachings. They show up and they're they float up in the sky and they come there. So it's like a sci-fi kind of worldview from ancient time. They didn't need Star Trek to beam down. They're beaming around in the old days. Okay, any other question? Yes, ma'am. I have hard of hearing.
Oh, so am I.
Probably because my own voice is so bored me so much for over 50 years of talking. So what is the question?
My question, I'd like you to say a little bit more about how this womb of non-duality
Yes.
nurtures compassion.
Yes.
And are you saying that the slight difference between, let's say, Advaita Vedanta is a recognition that there is some reality to the duality? I mean, how is it that compassion, or do you have to have compassion? In order to have compassion, is there duality? And
no. The true compassion comes from perfect empathy. So, for example, when you put your hand on a hot pot on the stove because someone's talking to you too much when you're trying to concentrate on cooking, and you don't say, "Shall I have compassion to my hand today?" and pull it off that hot pot. No, you instantly pull it off. So if you actually feel the other beings feel bad feeling, then it's as unbearable to you as your own bad feeling. So therefore you completely want to fix it. Compassion is only the wanting. It doesn't fix it by itself. It's the real will to do so. The will to alleviate the suffering of others. That's what compassion is defined as. Then what compassion is in action is a word called upaya, which means art, actually. People translate this as skillful means, which I don't like that translation. But it's not wrong, means of doing something. And kaushala means skill, so upaya kaushala is skillful means. But upaya is art, because since compassion is feeling that others don't realize that their reality is bliss, that their whole body is made of it, and that's what their health and their body is, their inner bliss. But they don't pay attention to that because they have a notion that they shouldn't feel bliss, because in most societies on this planet in the last few thousand years, bliss is usually illegal. And so they don't pay attention to it. And so how to get them to understand it? Then that's art of teaching, art of art, art of whatever it is. So non-duality can't be opposite of duality. It has to approach it, but you can't explain it. There's a famous thing in the Vedantist Sutra, where 32 bodhisattvas give their view of non-duality, and they do great things. Nirvana and samsara, thinking they're different, that's a duality. The entrance into the door of non-duality comes when you realize that Nirvana and samsara are the same, or light and dark. I mean, they do all kinds of things like that. And then finally, the sort of main authority in the room is this guy called Vimalakirti, who's a layman. And they say, well, what do you think? Well, then before that, Manjushri says, oh, all of you guys said great things about non-duality. But the problem is you said something, and you can't. Then he turns to Vimalakirti and says, Vimalakirti, what did you say? It's like the Marx Brothers or something. Then Vimalakirti doesn't say anything. He doesn't say anything. And then they all get different stages of enlightenment from his silence. It's called the lion's roar of the silence of Vimalakirti, which is like someone in a moment of authority where people's minds are probing toward the ultimate nature of things. Then doesn't say, but then there's two kinds of not saying. Again, because earlier in the sutra, another one doesn't say, another sort of enlightened person. And one of them is where you don't say because you think it's something you know about and they don't, and they won't understand what you say. And that's a bad one. And the good one is, you don't say because they don't need it. It's like, there's a little difference. Tattvamasi, if you're Brahma, why do you need to be told? You know it yourself. So Vimalakirti somehow changed his perception, where he sort of favored the side that sees everyone as already fine, already within Satchidananda, already made of Satchidananda. And by the fact of him seeing it, that created a field, because he was obviously a enlightened person, supposedly enlightened person, that created a field where they suddenly felt it for a second, at least for a while, based on that. They felt all right. They felt completely there. And so that was considered a great silence. Okay? Is that helpful? So the nurturing thing is so nice because you know why, and that's what my friend Isa, who has been with me the last few days, sick of me talking about this. But this, for me, it's something I'm very happy about, because our culture, in fact, I think Indian culture often, Chinese culture, or that's not the East-West thing. culture, authorities who have authority over people in a culture, they have a vested interest in not allowing those people to feel perfectly all right no matter what. They want them to feel they'll be okay as long as they obey the orders. And like religions take the inside of spirituality of being kind of God everywhere, you know, God in me, God around, and God in the form of a sparrow and stuff like Jesus said, for example, or Buddha said, others said. And they want them to say, no, you're in this veil of tears and suffering, and you better get used to it. But then you come here and you have a little ceremony with us, and you pay your dues here, and then after you die, you'll really be fine. Then you'll really be wonderful. But for so far, no, not now. So they have this kind of, they don't want non-duality to be right because they're afraid people won't work. People want to have fun. They'll want to they'll kill off the Albigensians who thought things were kind of cool. Jesus meant things were kind of cool. Then the popes or Avignon said they killed all of them, threw them off a cliff. And so many Sufis and mystics have been killed in the West and in the East here and there. But the great thing about India is everyone's kind of the wonderful, joyful, wealthy, because India was the wealthiest part of Eurasia. They had a surplus. So why not give a free lunch to some mendicant? Because you don't have a good icebox anyway, it's going to spoil, so give it away. But in the West or in China, no way, we don't want anybody who's not working for the corporation, which is the government. And the churches and the religions and the mosques and the temples, they get involved in that sort of thing, of withholding from people, making the idea that they're only worth whatever they do as long as they do their duty. Right? And they don't have that intrinsic divineness about them that they do have, actually, according to both Buddhism and Swamiji and Vedanta. Everybody has that intrinsic. You know, so we didn't hear Tattva, we didn't realize it. But actually, it's the case. That's what Vedanta has to say. Oh, yes.
So, first one is a comment, it's not a question.
Sorry?
First one is a comment, it's not a question.
Oh, is that a question or a comment?
I have a question too, yeah. So, in respect to your thought that when a person dies or a living being, not even a person dies, what happens to the consciousness?
Oh, okay.
That's your, and your
well, that is one question.
How something can become nothing. But the way we think, my background is I'm a professor in a medical school, that the consciousness is a function of the brain, and the living brain does not exist, so consciousness does not exist.
The living brain?
Yeah, the brain is not anymore alive.
Yeah.
So the consciousness is not there because consciousness is a function of the brain. So it's our thought. Your question, I'm not answering your question. But the way we think, I'm telling that the brain does not exist, so consciousness does not exist anymore. When brain was existing, consciousness was
Well,
existing.
what do you have to say about people like that guy Evan Alexander, who's a neuroscientist at Harvard, whose brain was totally flatlined by some virus that he had, and then he had a lot of experience during that time. He went to heaven and he wrote a whole book about it. So he's just lying, or he's confused, or
No,
what?
he's not lying.
He had experience out of the brain, and he was a neuroscientist.
Sure, and there are some, you're very right, and there are many other such experience in the literature, but he has still had a residual brain function.
Yeah, but
he was not dead.
why do you think that that is... Okay, I once had a conversation with a neuroscientist in New York at a hospital in Bellevue, and he said, there's no consciousness after death. I had corpses in my fMRI, and there was nothing there. So I know there's no consciousness after death. And then I said to him, well, we agree. When you die, the consciousness leaves that body. So if you put it on the body, you're not going to find consciousness. But that doesn't mean you prove that it didn't go somewhere else. For example, you have a computer, and you can wirelessly send your whole program, in fact, the whole content into Dropbox. You can send the whole thing wirelessly through the air. And so then that program, if you put delete after I send, then the program will no longer be in the hard disk, you can smash it with a hammer. But the whole content of it is still fair in Dropbox.
Yeah, that's right. That's another way of thinking, that consciousness is somewhere else.
Yeah.
All right, that's another theory, that consciousness is somewhere else,
Yeah.
and when brain is alive, brain is catching that consciousness.
Yeah,
right?
and in
So
fact-
nobody has proved that either.
Right.
But that's one thought.
Yeah.
The way we think, I'm telling you our thoughts that, brain has consciousness surely when it's living, and brain is not living anymore, so it may not have consciousness.
What you say,
But I think-
consciousness can operate through the brain. No one's questioning that. It's just like, the brain can operate through the eyes, right? But then you can also have visions without the eyes. And you inside your body, you can reproduce. When you have a dream, your eyes are closed, and you see things. So, things are more subtle than nuanced. And I don't know what your objection is, except maybe you think you don't want to have a future life, maybe, okay? I hope you're done. I hope
I
that
understand the other thought. I don't have any objection.
Yeah.
And
There are various thoughts.
Sure. So that's what I'm saying.
You see, we put it this way.
Yeah.
If the consciousness is nothing besides the brain, what that means is right now that we have no consciousness. So that makes us, and if we have that idea about ourselves, that's another way of making us helpless, actually. It's a very negative theory. And for example, it leads people to suicide, I'm quite sure. Like suicide rate is highly intensified by the fact that people are taught as if it was real, as if somebody had discovered that if they're really feeling bad and their situation seems insoluble to them, all they need to do is squeeze the trigger, grit their teeth and squeeze the trigger, or swallow a huge bunch of some sort of substance, and then they'll just enter nothingness. It'll be like permanent sleep. There'll be no consciousness. So then that bad feeling will be gone. And that's maybe, but nobody has actually discovered that the brain that the consciousness didn't go, becomes nothing. And in fact, it's illogical even to say it, because nothing is nothing. When you look for something and you didn't find it, you say somebody said, your wife says to you, well dear, did you find this? You say, no, there's nothing there. You say, but you didn't find nothing. You just didn't find what you were looking for. So the way we know logically that nothing is nothing.
That's one way of thinking, and I'm not arguing that.
What?
That's one way of thinking, when the consciousness is somewhere else, and brain is catching the consciousness as its function.
Let me tell you something that you don't
Yes.
Let me tell you something you don't know. In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which purports to be a report. Now, everyone here knows what lucid dreaming is? Have you ever heard of that? Right? And they can train people in labs to do it. But there are ancient Indian yogas called lucid dreaming. How to learn to be aware that you're dreaming when you're dreaming, and then use the dream to learn things without waking up. So that's called lucid dreaming. So in the Indian and Tibetan yogis, because all of the Tibetan stuff comes from India, actually. They just have sustained and refined what they received from India. And there are yogis who say they lucidly die after death. They then reborn. They reported what happened to them during that period of time. And then one of the things, that's called the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is this title. It's actually the Book of Natural Liberation by Learning in the Between State, in the Antarabhava or Varga state. So one thing they tell you, after you die, your consciousness hangs around a little bit sort of like a ghost for a while. And then you get upset because you're not sure what has happened. And you see your loved ones and you sort of go, hello, there was a movie called Ghosts, which was a dramatic movie written by Bruce Rubin, which sort of illustrated because he had read the Tibetan Book of the Dead and what happens to the character he had learned in there. And so you do that. Then you go to your own funeral. Then they say that your mind, your consciousness and mind outside of the brain, liberated from the brain, is 9 times more intelligent than when it was in the brain. And so you automatically clairvoyant, you have all kinds of knowledge. But one thing you can't do is you can't affect the matter, so people can't see you. And then they say, when you go to your funeral, which you tend to do because you hang around where your body was, and the people you knew, and they're all at your funeral. And then when your Uncle Joe is giving a speech about, oh, poor Bob, he's my name, poor Bob, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm going to miss him terribly, blah, 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 he's so great guy, and all that. And then you're reading his mind, and underneath you think, good riddance, stand the test. I'm sick of it. Thank God he's not going to bother me next Thanksgiving. Or whatever it is. Then they say, don't get upset. Everybody has double level in their mind too. there's often different thought streams, they're not even aware of them. And so people are just ambivalent, they are abnormal people. So don't freak out and stay calm, because it's really important for you to stay calm and happy in that state, because you need to travel and you don't want to get frightened or agitated, you know, because you're like in a dream, you're very insubstantial, your moods and your emotions are very mercurial in that situation. So they have a very elaborate descriptions of how it feels. And they may be wrong, they may be right, but the point is they do have that. They report such experience. And they codify, started in India, with what they call Nonduality. People who cultivate, spent their life examining themselves and looking into their mind in a way like put Freud and Jung and these people to shame completely. And even the unconscious, they totally were unconscious thousands of years ago. But they don't think it has to automatically be unconscious. They think you can become conscious of these deeper energies actually, and learn to master them and not be pushed around by them. They do feel them. But anyway, thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Any other thing? There's a lady who's been really like she's going to dislocate her shoulder. What is that?
Thank you, first of all, for a great talk. I have so many questions, but I'm going to stick to two. The first one is that if there is an explanation of our of our true nature and how this universe functions, which philosophy do you think describes it best? And if the answer is Vedanta, then are there any gaps in Vedanta that you feel have been better filled by Buddhism or any other religion so as to make it complete?
Okay, thank you. So you all heard that, right? Because she spoke to that. I love it. People, when they use the microphone, they can really hear them. Sometimes you give people the microphone and they go, oh, yeah. So, you know, I think Shankara and Nagarjuna, those two are the best. And the point is, because they, of course, Buddha before that, and a lot of other people on both sides. And the reason that I do is that they, first of all, say that they can't really describe everything, because it's beyond words, ultimately. But you can experience it. And then they provide you with various critical methods of how to do that. And they evaluate the other scientific views, etc., and they provide, you know, yogic methods and mental methods and so forth. And they really have a tradition which does that. And then on both sides also, there are people who don't fully get what they do, and they sort of go off this way and that way, because Viru Bhishana, if you know a little Sanskrit, you know, Bodhisattva, enlightenment in action, enlightenment in practice, Bodhisattva. And Viru Bhishana, a little bit intimidating to Viru, those who are timid. They're frightening to the timid, Viru Bhishana. And the idea that this here is the ultimate reality, and that it is infinite relativity, and there's no escape from this infinite relativity, but there's no limit to how it can be improved, and that you have to, and you are totally interconnected with every other being, and not only do you improve it for yourself, but for all of them. So you won't be really fully fulfilled until they all are. And that's kind of scary. It's a scary proposition. You know? And so any kind of trick way out, like, oh, some God is going to come and save me if I just say this mantra, or oh, I just cannot exist just if I shoot myself, or if I die, then I won't exist, so I won't have to worry about it, and I can just wait past the time until that happens. All kind of ways of getting out of the kind of commitment of what Dalai Lama called universal responsibility. In Sanskrit it's called adhyashaya, like a higher aspiration for the world in a certain way. And that the world, you know, they have a concept, they call it a Buddha land, or a Buddha kshetra, a Buddha field. I call it a Buddha verse. And a talk I gave down in San Jose was how to make the universe into a Buddha verse. Universe is boring. Just one verse, something ever turns into one. And that means that's an egotistical idea. It's what turns around me as my universe. Everybody has my universe. But a Buddha verse is everybody turns into everybody's enlightenment, and everybody's Satchidananda. And that's the best. That's the best. And even if it's a fantasy, even if it's unrealistic, it's better to live with that kind of hope and positivity, and because that will at least improve some little bit around you. You won't be all grumpy and freaked out and cranky and feeling unfulfilled and everything's meaningless and purposeless. It's incredibly depressing. The materialist worldview that this society lives in is very, very depressing. And that's why people, depression, that's a huge business. The number of antidepressants eaten in this place, which all have bad side effects, is huge. That's a multi-billion-dollar business, if not trillion-dollar business. And that's because the worldview is very depressing. Your life is meaningless. There's no point to it. You are worthless. You know, you're just like some worthless chemical like formulation that happened by total accident, and there's no moral purpose to it, and it's all going to be nothing when it's over. And then those people will say, and they're humanists, at least they do say, and I'm very grateful, they say, well, I do care about my children. Yeah, I'll be nothing, but I really care about future generations. But I'm sorry, this culture doesn't care about the future generations. If we cared about it, we would be turning off the petroleum industry. We would not be subsidizing them to wreck the planet. We would be really taking steps. We would not be ruled by morons. You know, overt and obvious morons. We would simply not tolerate it. We would not only 50 or 60% of us voting, if they're all morons, which they aren't. There are specific ones that we tend to have on top of us. And we get out because it all doesn't matter ultimately. It all doesn't matter. The terrible thing about thinking that what you really are is nothing, and you'll know that when you die. That means you're already nothing, because nothing, though something can ever be nothing, so nothing can stay nothing, basically. And if you're nothing, you have no power, what you do doesn't matter. And then you just want to make some money and have some fun, temporarily, and it all won't matter. And that's the society. So it's wrecking the planet. It is behaving in an uncivilized manner. This industrial greed and hatred, anger-driven society is behaving badly. I believe so. I don't know if Vedanta would agree with me, but I think so. I'm sorry to say.
I have one question actually.
You have a question? Oh, thank you, sir.
So the question is, according to Vedanta,
Yes.
Abhava, 6 pramanas are there, you know,
Yeah.
6 proofs. The inference,
Yes.
perception,
Yes.
and abhava means nothingness is also one kind of pramana. And according to
Negation.
negation.
That doesn't mean nothing. It's negation.
And according to Patanjali Yoga Sutra also, nothing is, if we can think, everything is the vritti.
Yes.
Shunyata is also a kind of vritti,
Okay.
modification of mind.
Well,
So, yes. So, according to Buddhism, especially the Nagarjuna, so this nothingness means, you told here, Buddhism also a kind of a relative kind of thing. So, but Vedanta conceptualizes this relative and absolute.
Mm-hmm.
So, according to Vedanta, there is no nothingness or there is no shunya. Everything is that. But according to Nagarjuna, the shunyata is there. But my point is that if Vedantic shunyata is something is there, but Buddhist shunyata, it is nothingness or something is there.
No, Buddhist shunyata is simply that all of the relative things are empty of any absolute thing. So then shunyata as a concept, which itself is relative, as you rightly say, in itself is empty. So you have shunyata, one of the 16 kinds of shunyata is the emptiness of emptiness. So it isn't there, shunyata is not there. What shunyata is the guarantee, you could say, and the discovery that all of this is there, in all of this interrelatedness, and there's no absolute in it. It's not, by the way, its infinite relatedness is that is the absolute. There's nothing apart from it that's absolute. And that's why Arjuna says, shunyata is the medicine for all the sufferings of the people who want to be absolute, and then the world doesn't react to them like that. But who takes shunyata as an absolute, that person is lost, because they have no medicine for them. And there are people who do that in Buddhism. Of course, there are people who misunderstand all these things. But shunyata is, actually there is a realm of nothingness. Ayatana, if you go ayatana realm. In the 4 formless ayatanas, which maybe mediums you could call it. You don't want to see realm, because realm is a spatial concept. So there are 4 medium of what's called the formless states. And one of them is the state of Akimjanyayata, of nothingness whatsoever, a subjective state of a yogi. But that's considered a real trap. It's sort of related to sleep state, where you think you're nothingness because you're unconscious. And but that's not nothingness; it's a state, right? So, and Buddha taught he put infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothing, absolute nothingness, and beyond consciousness and unconsciousness. All those 4, none of them are nirvana. So even when he was allowing some people to think that nirvana was elsewhere, which he did, because some people, if you tell them this is nirvana right here, they say, "Well, who needs it? I'm miserable here." I'm like, "Wait a minute, I'm miserable. This is nirvana. What is that?" They wouldn't get it. So they say, "Oh no, there's nirvana. You'll get to nirvana. Go there." Then when they get there, there's nobody there. So then that makes them able to tolerate being connected in infinite relativity. So anyway, I just think that it's not the social differences between Buddhism and Brahmanism, for sure. That Buddhism was critical of the absoluteness of the caste system, but they were not intolerant of the relative caste system, in that people moved up and down, and different people are at different stages, different levels now and then. They got along with that. They didn't try to violent things, some communist thing, pretending everybody's all equal, except for the dictatorship of the proletariat, meaning the dictators. So they didn't fall for that. They didn't try that. It was gentle thing, but I think it helped the Brahmins. And in India, about your thing about the best explanation in Indian philosophy, there was a great Indian philosopher. He was a professor of philosophy at Agra University named D.N. Dhirendranath Shastri, who I never met him. He's the grandfather of our friend, the lady who had the Indira Gandhi Center right now. Kapila Bhattacharya, who's her grandfather. And he has a book. It's called Critique of Indian Realism. He wrote a book. He's passed away now. Critique of Indian Realism. And in that book, you go to Parampara, and first you go to the lineage of his teachers that he pays, credits for his knowledge. And he starts out with, Kokila, or whoever, Gautama, not Buddha, but Gautama, who wrote Nyaya Shastra, because he's talking about Nyaya Vaisheshika, the logicians and the physicists, the Nyayikas and the Vaisheshikas, in Indian 6 darshanas, what they call the 6 philosophies, of the Brahminical philosophies. And he starts out with the Sutrakaras, and then he gets to the Shastrakaras about 800 years later, I think, Udyotakara, people like that. And then in between, he has Dignaga, Dharmakirti, and then he has this name that when I first encountered it, you can't figure it out, because it has this consonant cluster, Sherbatskaya Namaha. The Russian scholar Sherbatsky. And the reason he has that is that he was looking for the history of Indian logic and physics, the categories of the Vaisheshikas, etc. And he couldn't figure out why there was a long gap between the Sutrakaras, the ones who made the aphorisms, the basic framework of the tradition, and then the commentators were hundreds, 8 centuries later. And he couldn't figure out who they were debating with, the Shastrakaras in the 6th, 7th century post-Gupta and post-Gupta era. And so he was just, he was trying to write about the history. He couldn't figure it out. Then he read this Russian writer in English who had studied Sanskrit and Tibetan and had unearthed the Buddhist logicians. Pramana, we were talking about Pramana, although Dignaga boiled it down to 2 pranana, because he put a lot of the Shabda and all things like that, he put that into inference. Upamana, they all went into Anumana, into inference. So he's subcategories. So, but the same. So he puts the Buddhist ones, and then he put the Russian guy who introduced him to that. And he says in his preface, I went to every Sanskrit Vidyalaya in Calcutta, in Mumbai, in Delhi, in Lucknow, in Chennai, in wherever it was, and nobody could answer my question. And then when I discovered some of the Buddhist Sanskrit texts don't exist anymore, but some still do in Sanskrit, and those that did in Sanskrit exist in Tibetan. And so this Russian guy introduced me to this, which is the Indian tradition. because the Buddhists had the big universities during this 800-year period, and all the commentaries were written by them. And it wasn't just for Buddhists, because the Buddhists never, it's not like you have to belong to Buddhism to be saved. It's their logical service, it's educational service, basically. And they had lots of Brahmins and different Jains and people studying at their thing, and they taught medicine and engineering and Shilpa Shastra and all this kind of stuff. So to really put together again the history of all the different streams of the brilliant and magnificent Indian thought, you need to fit together the Buddhist and the Brahminical things. You have Shabdarshana, and then you have what the Buddhists call Chatur Siddhanta, the four theory streams, Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, Vijnanavada, and Madhyamaka. And then you have a good picture of Indian philosophy if you have those 10 things. Just the 6 Darshanas by themselves, because the Muslims wiped out the Buddhists at a certain stage, and then some Brahmins got more conservative, and they were anyway happy to have not somebody criticizing their rigid caste system, and they didn't really keep, and they burned all the Buddhist libraries, the Muslims did. So that's what happened, and that's what we have to restore. Yes, this gentleman has a comment.
I just wonder what all this has to do with waking up.
What did it have to do with it?
With waking up, with being here now and being spacious, still, and silent.
Yeah.
What does any of this got to do with it? Yeah, it sounds like more talk. And America is overthinking. We're all, at least I am, I'm maybe thinking 80% too much. So I'm wondering what you have to offer that would help us wake up and be here now.
Well, you clearly do not find the brilliance of the great Indian philosophers that helped you wake up. I would suggest you read Karl Potter's presuppositions of Indian philosophy might help you, but I don't think you want to. Because I think you have a definition of waking up as not thinking. And that is the way that the Eastern teachings have been taught here by people. And yes, it does give Western people a little bit of a buzz to tranquilize their mind by not thinking and do shamatha. But it will not overcome your egotism, just not thinking. It will not. And in order to overcome that, you have to critically analyze how it is structured, your sense of yourself, as either awake or asleep. And if you don't do that, if you don't use your great intelligence to do it, just because you read a lot of Western philosophy, you read a lot of Western science, you read a lot of Western literature, and you're still miserable. And it didn't help you, whatever you imagine waking up to be. So and that's part of the cultural hubris. So gee, if we didn't figure it out, their stuff must be just talk. But actually their talk may be more related to waking up than what we read. And so you have to open your mind to that. If you want to keep your mind closed and you don't want to think about anything, then that's fine. And you do look calm and nice and happy and cheerful. You do look too cheerful because you're like annoyed at all of this thought. I don't blame you. I don't blame you. You look very, very serious. So just this minute, now you smile. Otherwise you look really serious.
I appreciate what you're saying. It's just that from my own experience, or from the experience of the vast number of people around me at work and clients and all that, we seem to be thinking too much, and we live in concepts rather than in direct experience.
That's what I didn't know.
Instead of living with compassion for things as they are,
right.
We're at war with them and we're fighting them and we're analyzing, we're trying to change them. And so what I'm trying to do recently is I'm trying to be quiet, be still, and be spacious. For me, I think that could help me unclench the me thing of my life.
Well, that sounds good if that's your plan. Is this the better half?
Yeah, this is my idea.
Well, I think she'll be the one to evaluate. My better half is what I've done next week.
Thank you. I just wanted to make one small clarification, or possibly, about this issue of what's the difference between Vedantic Nirvana and Bauda, if you like, Nirvana. And it's not so much that they're really that different. I think, as you pointed out. So the question is why the hostility between them? Because one thing is it's kind of this question of Brahmana and the kind of sociology of knowledge. How do you get knowledge?
Yeah.
Now, Shankara is very much wedded to that Vaidika tradition because Shruti Shabda is part of his history, his Pramana.
Right.
So everything for him goes back to the Vedas, by which he means Upanishads. So when he makes an argument or refutes an argument, he caps that iti Shruti, that's what the Veda says, that's absolute.
Right.
And it's also coming out of that Vaidika tradition of Guru Parampara. In other words, you learn your knowledge from your Guru, at the feet of your Guru, right?
Yeah.
Buddhists don't believe that necessarily.
Well,
I mean, the Buddha himself doesn't have a Guru. He doesn't believe in Shruti.
He's Swayambhu.
Yeah, he's Swayambhu. And that's why Shankara, has nasty names for the Buddhists, as Mahavainashika, as Nastikas, not that they don't believe in gods. They all believe in gods. They don't believe in the Shruti. They don't accept that.
They don't
right?
accept the divinity
They
of
don't
the
accept the Vedas as, and that's, I think, the argument that they have. But the end product, the actual truth of it, not so different, really.
Well, that's true, although then may I ask you just one question. Why does Ramanujan then say that Shankara himself was a closet Buddhist? Prachanbhavna.
Because of the monism.
Because
he's a monist. Because he's an Advaita.
Yeah, and also because of the Nirguna Brahman concept. That ultimately, that relativized the Shruti, the absoluteness of the Shruti and the Vedas, and that goes along with the creative story and the whole thing.
But the other
that's so in a way, that's where Vedanta came over and touched Buddhism, and where they actually are very similar.
But you spoke about that sort of intellectual breakthrough that you get in the Indian side of you are God. That was everything in the West.
Right.
See, that's what the other Vedantas don't accept. Because the Advaitas and the Advaitas make a distinction between the individual soul and God. Which the Advaitas don't make. And that's why they accuse him of being a Prajana.
That's why I
a secret Buddha.
Mr. Thurman, he meant actually by saying God, Brahman. So,
Names like the Indra and gods and these, I mean, the gods that helped the Buddha attain enlightenment. The gods who sleep.
Yeah, they do, yeah. Well, not only that, but Brahma asked Buddha, when you get enlightened, please tell beings that when horrible things happen to them, it's not my fault. So right here in the ancient Indian thing, they're dealing with the theodicy problem. The problem of creator of monotheist is who made evil. If he made everything and it's omnipotent, right? That's their problem. And so the Buddhists help Brahma out of that by saying we all make it together. We all make it together. We're all interacting, and we interweave our reality. So anyway, I think it's maybe the time. Is it? Are we finished? Is everybody tired? Everybody, we're awake, but we're looking to go to sleep. We are all awake, but we're looking to go to sleep. Right?
Thank you very much. Thank you for such enlightening presentation on this very interesting topic. I, on behalf of Vedanta Society Berkeley, express my sincere thanks and gratitude to Professor Robert Thurman for taking time out of very busy schedule to come this Vedanta Society Berkeley and address the congregation. Actually, we have been waiting for 1 year to hold this program. So last year it was scheduled, but unfortunately he was sick, so we could not have this kind of program. But this year we are very happy that he is able to come here and deliver such a beautiful talk. We really appreciate having this interesting to cover this critical area. This is a very critical area, and actually I did not know that Sri Ramakrishna, he mentioned that Buddha never accepted God, but he did not tell anything about God. That doesn't mean that he didn't accept God. I did not tell anything about God, that doesn't mean I don't accept God. So he was silent on that particular aspect. So anyway, we came to know many things about that. So to make this talk memorable, we have a small token of appreciation, and please accept this with love, respect,
thank you.
and gratitude.
Oh, thank you so much. How kind. How nice. Oh, wow, look at that. That's a great thing. Thank you. That's a real honor. Thank you. Thank you so much. That's lovely. That's nice.
Thank you very much for
Thank you, everyone.
holding this, and I thank Professor Goldman and Shally Goldman also for attending this beautiful lecture. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's nice. Okay. What? Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Sharada Devi, right? Yes. Vivekananda. That's right. He said he was trying to emulate. He had a